and welcome to the Bald Ambition Podcast. I am your very bald host, Mookie Spitz, and the one with tons of ambition today is Ingrid Moon. Ingrid and I have known each other for many, many years, and I have been tracking her progress and adventures in publishing and editing and all the great stuff that Ingrid has been doing. And I recently reached out to her upon the publication of my own second novel. It's a sci-fi novel that you might have heard me bloviating about. I'm reading sections, I'm tweeting the whole damn novel. I'm reaching out to influencers. I'm looking for those reviews and some recognition in this crazy tsunami of petabytes of content that's streaming on everyone's phone. How do we get noticed? And Ingrid is a veteran of the profession, as it were, and I brought her on for some insights that I am all ears to hear about, and I figured that our listeners would be curious to hear about, not only within the realm of publishing, of self-publishing, of editing and content creation, but there's some similar best practices that apply to all of marketing, many of which we've been covering on the podcast to date. So welcome aboard, Ingrid. Thank you for making time.
Thank you for having me. I love it.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little background, some of the novels that you've published? I know you've done some editing. You have a nonfiction science educational book for science fiction writers, because it drives me nuts. They hardly ever get it right, and when they get it right, it's so wonderful. And all the other great stuff that you've been doing for so many years.
Sure. I started the self-publishing journey about 2 years ago. I actually published a novel in 2011, but and it's out there because back then, you know, they had CreateSpace and a couple other like self-publishing tools, but Amazon was still young and everything was kind of just new. And then I sat on that same novel for 12, 13 more years, and then brought it back to life in a little bit of a new form. So basically, I am technically, most of my career was spent doing technology-related marketing and entertainment, and I don't know, I can't even, it's a pretty broad spectrum of things I did in technology, internet-related. And then I switched and became a school teacher, and because I love science and technology so much, I specialized in teaching science. So mostly biology and physics. I don't like chemistry, so I don't teach it, but I could if I really needed to.
You're allergic to ratios.
I'm allergic to stoichiometry.
Exactly. Stoichy. I had a high school teacher back in Niles North High School in Chicago, and he used to call it stoichiometry.
Yeah, we had a chemistry teacher from Germany, and he called everything stoichy, and then we had, whenever he would sing things that I still remember to this day, like instead of saying moles or molar, what's the molarity, et cetera, he would go MOLAR. And so, of course, you remember that stuff. But I don't remember what...
It obviously induced trauma, so you can't teach it. It's just too much for you to go back, right?
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah. So that's anyway, awesome. So yeah. You're a school teacher. You teach science, and you've got a book from back in 2011 that you brought back to life, and I'm assuming you made some tweaks. And you're celebrating the world of, in a sense, Amazon KDP. The good news is people like us can publish. We can get it out there without getting an agent, without having an army of editors, and we can just do our own thing. And the bad news is that just about anyone can publish, and almost everyone does, so it's so crowded that it's really tough to get noticed.
It is really tough to get noticed. And I think with 40 million or 40 billion, I don't know how many books are out there, there's a 40 something with a lot of zeros after it, it's really difficult to get seen. Even with ads, because you're fighting for ad time with dollars. So if you're independent, it's hard to do. And then there's Facebook ads, and then there's don't do ads, and then there's all the like free opportunities for getting your, books out there, whatever. But it's a very challenging space to navigate, especially if you're new to it and you don't come from the publishing world to begin with. I don't even know if people from the publishing world know what to do in the self-publishing realm. But these days, even traditionally published authors have to do a lot of their own marketing. So a lot of the stuff applies regardless. So the authors probably know a lot more than the publishing people do.
Yeah, and that's the big reason I brought you on, which is the first person perspective on publishing, on getting content out there. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what you've experienced? Maybe share a few top line best practices, the do's and don'ts.
I don't know if there's a lot of don'ts because you could try everything, but it started out with, so I revised my original novel from 2011. I put it through workshops and learned a lot, not only in those workshops, but I went to writing conferences, live ones, virtual ones. I did all kinds of stuff to try to, make sure I understood how to make a really good story. Because I think if you don't have a really good story, it's harder to get out there because you need good reviews, and a good story equals good reviews, pretty much. If you can get the reviews, that's a whole nother thing. But anyway, so I published that in October. I had built it on a platform called Campfire Write. It was kind of like Scrivener or any of these other tools, except this one was specifically geared toward people with like fantasy and sci-fi world building. And so they had a special, I don't know if it was a contest or just a opportunity to publish back in November 2023. Actually, it was October. And so I sort of said, hey, can I be part of this thing? And I got selected, I guess, and then a bunch of other people. And so in that October, they launched their reader app. And then, I don't think they had a reader app back then. Anyway, I don't know. They launched a whole bunch of these, or published a whole bunch of these novels for their platform. And mine was one of those. And so that was cool. And I met a lot of great people. And one of them put together a writers group just for a select group of us that were kind of active in there. And we've been together since. So that's been also very helpful in my writing journey, is to have a writing group with people in different stages of the journey that really help to make it so if you have questions and if you're totally lost or whatever or stumped, you have somebody to go to. You can say how do I do this book swap thing again, or how do I blah blah blah. So yeah, I'm getting off track because I tend to do that a lot. When I meander, my brain goes everywhere.
Okay, but just to put a pin in it, though, the initial best practice that you're sharing is join a community of like-minded souls. They're all at different points in their journey, and you could share insights and best practices from people in the know. And you got experienced folks and newbies. You're all going through it together. And that's a great way to, dip one's toes into this self-publishing racket. How do you handle the feeling, if it even comes up, of just competitiveness, the tribal nature of groups? In the early days of the internet, everything was pretty much siloed. You had the message rooms and the chats, and people were doing all their own thing. And pretty much since Twitter blew it all out into the open, the web has become really a contentious environment of fake news and conspiracy on the one hand, but also bullying and competitiveness. What's your experience in these writers' groups? Is it friendly? Is it combative? I mean, overall, it sounds like it's been net positive for you.
Yeah, I'm only in a few groups. I just started this one for science fiction because the group that I'm in is they're mostly fantasy writers. There's a little bit science fiction in there, but I'm the only one who's space opera, heavy, hard science fiction type things. So I feel like sometimes I need someone to sound off more story ideas and things like that, who's more in my realm. But ultimately, as far as marketing and just growth as an author altogether, my group has been fantastic. And it's a very small group. We're not just anybody can come in or whatever, because we don't want to mess up the vibe where somebody comes in with their negativity or something. So we've been very fortunate.
Or their magnum opus, for that
matter. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So so we're not like self-promoting to each other in any way. We're really just helping each other along. And
that sounds wonderful. And
yeah.
my ancillary question to that is, what are some of the macro challenges that you find most common with people struggling to write that great book, especially in science fiction? I know you mentioned to me offline that you've written a wonderful nonfiction book, a science educational book, explicitly for science fiction writers so they can get themselves up to speed on just the basics of science, mathematics, cosmology, physics, so they can know what they're talking about when they describe situations and make it a little bit more realistic than just bloviating about fantastic elements that have no relationship to anything that anyone's really talking about.
Sometimes those fantastic elements work fine in the story, in the context of the story, but I like real science just as a human being. I love science, and I've always loved science. So, obviously I'm a science teacher. I have a lot of background knowledge, a lot of resources and information that I can tap into. So I wrote these. It's actually 3 books, and I actually have a 4th. I just haven't gotten around to pushing it yet. I probably should do that soon. So I have Astrofiction, which is all about cosmology, space sciences, even things like how worlds evolve and stuff. And it's a reference book. They're all reference books. So they're not necessarily like, let's read about, not like Neil deGrasse Tyson has, books out that are great for people who don't know anything about astrophysics, right? These are just reference books. You're like, oh, how far away is Mars from Earth? I need to go look that up real quick, right? Now you can Google that, or you can use, an AI tool or whatever to find this information. So I kind of am sad that I didn't put this out a lot earlier. But right now, if you don't want the NSA or some other weirdos looking up, seeing what you type into Google, for example, like how much blood comes out of the human body when I stab it with a sword, right? You don't want the NSA or the FBI knocking on your door. So having a reference book like this makes it helpful. So Astrofiction is one. That was my first one. And then Biofiction, which is all biology, anything from like, what's that white gooey stuff that squirts out of the cockroach when you step on it, to things about the human body and our ability to endure space, for example. How long can you live in space? What does it do to your body? Because a lot of times you see people like, I'm going to shoot myself out of this spaceship and shoot myself to the other spaceship, real fast, and I'm going to be in the vacuum of space. So what happens to your body when that happens, when you do that? So things like that. So Biofictions, it's the thickest one, and it's actually really good for fantasy too. It's not just for science fiction writers. It's great for fantasy or mystery or like crime. If you have a crime scene and you want to like look up some information about how the body might decompose, things like that. So that one's a really broad reference book. And then the third one, go ahead.
Yeah, that's neat. Keep going.
Oh, so the third one is Robofiction, which, because I come from the technology world, and I was very recently working for a blockchains company, which did identity, not crypto. So like it's blockchains, but I would say for good use, not for, whatever crypto is. But anyway, I learned a lot about things like the Internet of Things and various other technologies that are sort of either emerging or are being used in ways that nobody really thinks about it for, like, say, like supply chain management. Like, who would have thought? So I decided to write a book about that. That took a lot more research, and it's written more like you can read this book and not so much as a reference, but it is also a good reference. So that has all kinds of crazy technologies. I wish I had it right in front of me. If I did, I would tell you more of the technologies that are in there, but lots of great stuff. So that's if you're writing a spec fic thing and you about AI or cyberpunk or something, this might be helpful.
That's great. These sound like terrific resources for writers to keep them on point. And what I found is when you know more about your subject and dive in, then that triggers new ideas that in turn trigger additional ideas.
For sure.
So the science fiction backdrop of your drama becomes instrumental in terms of generating even more drama and intrigue. So it could be very, very useful. And your point about privacy is well taken too, that you can actually keep some of your research offline, as it were, to to just keep the goods under wrap. That's great. It does bring to mind one of the challenges that I found as a writer and as a reader, especially in science fiction. And I already mentioned that there's this sense that a lot of folks doing the writing and even the reading aren't that aware of basic kinds of science. So,
and that's why I wrote these books originally. I was in a virtual conference, and people were asking questions about science more than they were asking questions about how to write science fiction, like the writing process. And I was like, you don't know science and you're trying to write science fiction? Like, I get it, you could just make stuff up, but you don't even know how, like, the planets revolve around or orbit the sun or whatever. Like, I just couldn't. I was flabbergasted. So that's why I wrote these books.
Yeah, that's terrific. So bless you for doing that. There's in my sequel to the book, there's a tidally locked planet orbiting a red dwarf, and a usual way of looking at it is just, a planet orbits a star and it rotates, and when you get into the physics of planetary formation and solar systems based on our knowledge right now, it's fascinating, and once again, reality far outdoes the imagination of a writer, where you can imagine a world where half the sky is filled with this red orb. You're so close you could see the corona from the star shooting up, and it's tidally locked. So it's this huge orb is always at the same place in the sky, and half the planet is probably frozen over, and the other half is a vast desert. So just understanding the basics of planetary formation and physics and cosmology already creates a world for you which might even go beyond your initial feelings of what it might be like, and then you could riff off that.
Yeah, and you just gave me 3 more things to put into Astrofiction, which is the smallest of the 3 books. So yeah, thanks.
All right. Put in red dwarfs, which could actually be they could live for 1 trillion years. They could burn for hundreds of billions of years. Imagine the stellar systems around a star that could just be tens, hundreds of billions years old. It's just amazing. So wow. And then so that's one. One is the facts. If you know science facts, your science fiction's better.
Yes.
And then my other challenge is actually the converse of that, which is there's so much obsession over world building and facts and information that the storytelling gets lost, that they embody what I call the hate problem, which is HAITE. I heard a podcast with an author talking about this, and it really stuck in my mind. And it's an acronym for "Here's an idea, the end." And this plagues science fiction more than most genres, which is imagine beings who could live on the surface of a neutron star. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What would happen if our heroes plummet into a black hole? The aliens have invaded, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And you lose sight of the humanity which drives most storytelling, and characters become cartoon cutouts instead of actual flesh and blood people who deal with issues and get through it.
Correct. And it happens a lot in fantasy too. There's people will get stuck in the cycle of world building and never actually get to their story, and they'll have hundreds of thousands of words or pages of world building information. But what's the point of that if you don't have a story to tell? So the way I go about it is usually I have an idea, right? Like, aliens are going to invade Earth. And then I think about things like, who's dealing with that? And what is the problem that they're dealing with? So that now you have a character. So you have at least one character that you're going to drive forward who's dealing with this problem. And then as your character starts going through some of their challenges, you start to build the world around that too. So you're going to find, what do I need in my world that will, make this world seem real? And what do I need in this world that will become another challenge or create more tension for this character? And so as you're driving forward and always thinking about the tension and the humanity of it, then you're going to have a story. But all the world building could come secondary. It doesn't have to be built out before you even think about it. You do want to make sure you stay consistent within a world. So, for example, in fantasy, like I'm working on one right now where I don't know what kingdoms are around. I don't even know what their names of these kingdoms are. I don't even know anything outside of this town that they're in. But it doesn't really matter. And if it comes up that someone's like, oh, well, I come from such and such place, like, great, make it up right there. And then you can, there was a war between two duchies and the two dukes, hated each other, and then blah, 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 right? So you can start making that stuff up as you go, and you don't have to have everything spent in, or put out in the world. And I think actually the more you spend time on your world building, the less time, the farther away from a story you actually become or actually get, because your focus becomes more about the world and less about your idea or your characters or your whatever. So it's really hard to then come back out and say, oh, I'm not talking about the world. I'm talking about people overcoming challenges, which is what all stories are.
100,000%. And I've gone through that similar kind of arc where it's been challenging for me to draw balance between ideas, between settings and descriptions, and the human drama, which is really the underpinning of all storytelling. And part of it, I think, had to do with me just grappling with my own emotional maturation. Like, it's easy to avoid one's problems by hiding behind the veneer of hyper intellectual or hard science fiction or big time world creation.
Right.
You're bloviating about all these things devoid of emotional resonance, in a sense, just to get away from all your problems. You're escaping into science and worlds and these places that are far away. And I think literature and storytelling are actually the exact opposite. You make yourself vulnerable, you open yourself up to actual human connection, and then you create characters that are an embodiment of not your sheer fascination for interesting stuff, but representatives, if you will, and ambassadors of your own personal struggles. And if you're able to project them that way, then you're deeply vested in characters that then go through an agonizing journey of self-discovery and revelation. To your point, they solve problems and meet challenges. And in doing so, they might not become better people, but they learn about themselves and the world and ultimately express themselves in ways that connect better with their fellows. And it sounds kind of cliched and trite and noble in that Greek sense, but it's also, I think, archetypal for making a story work.
Yeah.
And I see it over and over again where writers, you can tell they're struggling. I need to give a character a name, and they don't know whether it's too wacky or too conventional, and then they create dialogue which is clunky and unnatural because it's really just an artifice for getting from one chase scene or action scene to another. And then it becomes just an exercise in shit that happens instead of people doing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm going to say that, like, I feel like sometimes my third novel sort of went into that territory because third in a series, right? So in the first novel we have it's The Handler's Gambit, in case anybody out there wants to go.
Yeah, and we'll leave links for all your stuff in the description.
Perfect. So in The Handler's Gambit, we have a young strategist. He's like a genius tactician who's kind of come from a nowhere sort of life. So he's working for the bad guy in this book. So he's literally like doing the bad stuff for the bad guy. Like, let's blow up these other ships. They're innocent. Who cares? Let's kill them. And he feels really bad about it. So his challenge is really, he wants to escape to the bad guy's rival, who he thinks is, he's been protecting her all along, so he thinks that she's going to be grateful and happy to see him. And so you're moving toward that in this plot, but is it really going to be that easy for him? And so in the meantime, he's stuck because he can't, he could leave, but if he leaves, this bad guy will hunt him down and kill him. But he's assigned to work with an assassin who is just reckless and out of control and hates the bad guy as much as he does. And so the two of them bond. And then there's all this. So intermixing all of these characters and having them face all these challenges that lead to him being able to escape and then, spoiler, right? And then turn that whole thing around where he's got to somehow keep the fleet that he's fled to from being pursued and destroyed by the bad guy. So there's a lot of conflict, a lot of backstory, a lot of everything in there. And I have this like fully, this character with like total chronic anxiety who's dealing with, every minute of his life he's going to die. And then in the second book, spoiler alert, they live, he's now free, right? And he doesn't know what to do with himself, and he's not very good at it. And that's his new challenge. And it's a lot of a lighter, less threatening kind of conflict. And then in the third one, in the second one, he loses everything. And so in the third one, I wanted that to be more about him figuring out how to regain his he's already regained his humanity, how to regain his like fleet back, how to deal with everything that he's lost. But the other character, the assassin, ends up kind of taking over the story. And it's not a bad thing because she's a pretty fun and amazing character too. But I don't know, it just went down that path of like, it's not as deep and the stakes don't feel as high. They are. But I don't know, it's just me, I think, ruminating on my own like story. Like it didn't come out quite the way I wanted it to, and I feel like I shouldn't have published it just because I felt like I had a timeline, but I did. And it's not bad. I mean, it's gotten some good reviews, and people who've read the whole trilogy have said they love it and whatever, but I as an author, I'm like, I'm not sure that was the best I could have done. So who knows?
Yeah, we're all our own worst critic, right? But you also illustrate one of the malaise that are experienced by all writers and the mini-series in general, right?
Right.
Which is the initial idea is terrific, and usually it's a coming-of-age story or it's a hero story, and whether it's Tony Stark, who starts as an a-hole and ends as a likable a-hole, it's an origin story. And origin stories, by their very nature, are characters who are struggling to find themselves. And it's based on an ongoing battle of them against the world. And that creates a lot of dramatic tension. You don't even have to try too hard. And then once the character is established, and to your point, they overcome these basic challenges, there's what I call the then what syndrome, which is all right, they have arrived, they have overcome their basics, they've become whom they've tried to be. And then the challenges are removed. The existential dilemma is no longer there. And then the issues of the story starts to smack of something that's more ad hoc rather than organically a natural consequence of whom they're trying to be. The Matrix is a classic example. The first Matrix movie I thought was very well done. And it went off the rails with the sequel. Why? Because the first Matrix movie ended with Neo becoming himself. What's the last scene in the movie? He's at a payphone, which is delightfully anachronistic. And he's literally calling the mainframe and laying it down. I'm going to come get you. We're going to revolt against you. And we're going to take back our world. And then he flies off into the air, the final proof that, there is no spoon. He has overcome the simulation. And you can't wait for the sequel. Oh, my God, this guy is going to kick some ass. And for whatever reason, the Wachowski, now sisters, decided that Neo is in an existential crisis and doesn't really know what to do next. So we get a grand tour of this city beneath the earth, and we get Neo walking hallways and talking to people because he's confused and he doesn't know what to do next.
Mm-hmm.
Gag City, you have
Mm-hmm.
destroyed the through line of the story, and all
Mm-hmm.
drama has been milked out of it for what? World building. It's like, let us
Yeah.
show you the world,
Yeah.
let us show you Zion, and let's have a meeting of the elders to describe the civil war and crisis among the humans. Get out of here. Same problem with Lucas's prequels to
Yeah.
Star Wars. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
are you serious? It's like tariffs and a trade war. If nothing else, he had a premonition to what's happening now. But nothing was more boring than that as a trailer. And you know that the author, you know that the world, and you know that the story is headed for a train wreck when they don't know what to do next. And what makes for an exciting read is when the hero doesn't really know exactly what's going on, but they know what they want.
Right.
And they almost stumble through some kind of world, and if you can make the world interesting and fantastic and compelling, then it's a double rise, right? And the challenges that they're up against and meet and overcome are like you in your own life. I could relate to that, and you're
Mm-hmm.
vested, you're into it. You're reading about drama, not just shit that happens to somebody in a cool place.
Right. Right. So yeah, my sequel was it's a year after he's freed himself, and so there's a year's worth of him establishing his own career, and he has his own fleet, and he's contracted with people, and he's a really smart guy, so he can do all these really smart things. But and he likes treasure hunting. That's his like favorite thing to do. But but then I take the whole situation to another part of the galaxy so that it's new and fresh again, and there's more to discover. And so you're not just rehashing or expanding on what was interesting in the world in the first book. The main difference is that I had to have a new bad guy. And so I said, his backstory is that he escaped from this empire, and he's always being hunted. And so he's never really safe. He's never really free. And that's kind of the theme, is that you're never really free. You're always beholden to somebody. And then he has to figure out how he's going to like deal with being an adult, so to speak. But it's all drama. Like, it's all new, it's all fresh, it's all drama. So then the third one is a little weirder, because then you're still in that same universe, and then it becomes the sequel to the second book, as opposed to a through line from book 1 to book 3. So I've thought about doing a fourth book, and then basically you have your origin story as the Handler's Gambit, and then the Warrior's Shade and the Tempest's Fury are 2 books in a trilogy. So we're trying to figure out what we're doing with that. It sort of depends, because I have these 2 characters who are fairly equal in terms of their importance. So I don't know. It's hard to this book's just about him or just about her. I don't know. I shouldn't be like dissing my own books, but as an author, we can't help ourselves but think, how could I have done that better? Because
I mean, that's
even
the
after
thing.
it's published, you're like,
we're our own worst critics. That's what I've been grappling with for decades of writing, where I'm just not satisfied. There's this huge delta between your imagination and what you think the book could be and what it is before it's actually written in your brain and in your heart.
Yeah.
And then when you actually put pen to paper, or you start tapping at those keys, and then you see it reflect back at you, and then you're reading your writing as if you're a reader, and then you can't help but often think that it sucks. Or parts might be pretty good, and then just the totality of it falls short of what you want. And that, on the one hand, could be stifling, totally asphyxiating physically and even emotionally. And it could also encourage you to get better, which is, if you think that it's substandard, a lesser writer might think that it's okay and publishable. You think that it sucks and should be improved, and then that'll trigger you to pursue your own excellence, which is that balance beam that every creative person has to walk between what's a minimal viable product and what's a true expression of my vision.
Exactly.
And that's really very difficult to balance. And that's one reason I'm excited about my sci-fi book, which is, after a long time trying this, I think I cracked it. That's what I was mentioning to you offline, my
Uh-huh.
enthusiasm now, which is like,
Yeah.
I think I got it. It's taken me a long time, but I think I got it. And there's a short story that I wrote that sucked. And that really helped me figure out what could work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that process was really exciting. And even though I was hating on that original short story, it had the essential world that I was trying to create. And I realized at that point what I was doing wrong, which is the two things that we've been talking about, which
Mm-hmm.
is world building first and characters second,
Mm-hmm.
and then characters second and world building first, which is like no one gives a shit because your characters are just cutouts and you're using the characters and the action just to illustrate how the world works rather
Exactly.
than tell a good story. So
Exactly.
so I think I figured it out, and then when I did figure it out, I was on a roll. And then I coupled with this with another issue that I had that I wanted to share with you, and this is especially applicable to science fiction, which is what's a worthwhile goal in a genre that has almost exhausted itself with its own tropes? So here's what I mean by that. Or how many books can you have about an alien invasion? How many books can you have about terraforming Mars? How many books can you have about plummeting into a black hole or other dimensions? How many books can you have about a galactic empire after Asimov's foundation, let's say? Uh, Going back to what we're saying, it's all about the characters in the story, but how do you get over this idea that here's another alien invasion book, here's another book on a genetic mutation run wild,
Or an assassin who,
or an
hates
assassin who
everybody and
who hates everyone and has these amazing powers, but has this
yeah.
incredible Achilles heel that if he doesn't eat asparagus every 13 hours, that his body will decompose into a mushroom,
Well, I
right?
think that the key there is that's the key right there, right? You there First of all, there are big audiences for the tropes. So people who love, for example, Timothy Zahn, not counting the Star Wars stuff, um, they are looking for his particular style of, very fluid writing, very simple. It's not over stylized or anything, like Snow Crash or some of those stories that I can't even read. Um,
Yeah. You probably will find my novel unreadable if given that.
no, yours is actually very unique, and we're going to talk about that in a minute too.
Okay.
Um, but people love that kind of thing, right? So they're like, I'm going to read every Timothy Zahn book because the way he does like space opera and other galaxies with alien sidekicks and humans with problems, that he's great. And so anybody who writes like him, I'll read those kind of books too. And like they really want that particular thing, right? I want Mars colonization books. I want to think about colonizing Mars myself. So I want to, read everybody's challenges that they're facing and see which ones I don't know. And then, well, Warhammer is really popular. So Galactic Empire has become like very popular. And anyway, a lot of these tropes, basically people like to read a specific thing. So what I do is I can say, well, there's an audience for this or an audience for that or whatever. How can I make it different enough that it's new and fresh, but also still follows what this audience is going to want? It's not necessarily pandering to the audience, but it's just knowing that your tropes can be very important in terms of selling your book. So The Handler's Gambit has it is a struggle for me to figure out, for example, what comp titles would be next to it on a bookstore shelf, because it's not really military science fiction, but it's also not really space opera because I don't have any aliens. It's just very weird. Like it doesn't fit a lot of tropes, right? And I think that might be part of its challenge. If it hits more tropes, it can find an audience faster. So I don't know.
You bring up a very, very good point, and this gets to the heart of really the theme of this podcast series, this bald ambition that I've been doing, which is positioning and branding. So
Hmm.
people like a flattering reflection of themselves, and they have limited bandwidth to explore or be creative themselves. So the inverse of what I was saying is that tropes are good, and that's what you're saying too, because there's an established audience. So you could talk about an alien invasion, and people aren't like, oh man, I've another alien invasion book, really? Their reaction is, oh, gimme, gimme, gimme. I want to read
Hmm.
it. I want to read another alien invasion book, and they're actually more comfortable. At least this is an established audience segment to pick up an alien invasion book because they know what they're getting and they like
Exactly.
alien invasion. So maybe from a creative point of view, the trope might be exhausted. But from a reader's point of view, it's like, when have you ever had bad pizza, right? It's I'm
Oh,
I'm hungry, and I'm gonna eat. So
I've had bad
there's
pizza, but okay.
yeah, that's true, especially living in California. But anyway, it's I guess what I'm getting at is you're hungry and you eat. You're hungry and
Right.
you eat. There are people
Right.
who are hungry for alien invasions. There are people who are hungry for terraforming Mars or whatever. And as an author, you're actually better off catering to an established need than trying to strike off and create a hybrid, let alone a new kind of genre, because people aren't
Yeah.
going to know what the hell you're doing, and you're going to force them to get out of their comfort zone, which
Right.
is not why most people read. They read because I got this other alien invasion book. I can't wait to sit by the pool, and I'm going to
Hmm.
eat this stuff up. So you make a great point. A great
Yeah.
point.
If you think about alien invasion movies, right? Look at like Independence Day, which I just watched on. We always watch that on 4th of July. It's always fun.
Yes.
Independence Day, you have the bad
That's
aliens
like
come in,
that's
right?
like Die Hard on Christmas. It's a
Right.
must. It's in my
And you have
yeah.
First Contact or Contact, whatever, the one with Jodie Foster, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, that's a whole different perspective of an alien invasion type of thing. And then there's like the semi-recent one with the octopus people and their weird circle language. I can't remember what the name of the movie is.
Oh,
It was
Arrival.
Arrival, right? With the time, it has like the time
Yeah.
changes and all this weird. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was so unique and like totally mind blowing. It was fantastic.
People loved that movie. They
Yeah.
loved it. Yeah.
If you're into the, oh, go ahead.
yeah. No, please, you go ahead.
I was gonna say if you're into the more Independence Day type alien invasion, where or what's the War of the Worlds, that kind of thing, then you're probably not going to like it as much. But if you're interested in the alternative approaches to alien contact and whatnot, then those kind of stories are fantastic because they're so unique and they just twist so many different things, or they add in like the time issue or whatever. Like it's not really time travel, but you know what I mean. Just adding that little stuff in that's what's great about it. Anyway, so you can have your tropes, and then you can put your own twist on them and make them more.
Tweak the tropes, and within a trope, there's a sub genre of the genre, which is the nice alien, the empathetic alien, the ET
Right.
alien, phone home.
Oh yeah, ET, right?
Yeah, the ET phone home, and then you've got the the Klingons, who are
Yeah.
evil, but they could be domesticated, and then you've got the Independence Day pure evil aliens who just want to annihilate everything alive. So, there you pays your money and you makes your choice when it comes
Right.
to all this stuff. And once again, your point is really a good one, that if you're mixing and matching and blending, then you might be doing something original, but that narrows your audience for general consumption because you're kind of training the audience. So you might be ahead of the curve, but because you're ahead of the curve, it's going to take a while, if at all, for it to pick up in any kind of meaningful way.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that I think is where I'm at, which is, my first book was a collaboration with an illustrator, and I wrote the whole thing and he illustrated, but we spent a lot of time. I was living in New York, he was in California at the time, and we did a lot of video calls and WhatsApp voice chats, and he would riff on the scenes. He wouldn't even read the book, really. He just kind of heard me talking about it, and then we'd riff on it. And in a sense, he was my emotional support illustrator. I had a buddy that I could riff the story off of. and he would make cartoons, and he was a very gifted illustrator. And
Mm-hmm.
we ended up with a book called Super Santa, and it was based on a screenplay we'd written together in the exact same way. I did all the writing, and he did the riffing. I would sit at my desk for an hour or two before we started our shift. We were former colleagues at an agency, and we banged out a screenplay, a 30, 60, 90 Hollywood-style screenplay with the essential theme that Santa Claus is boring to the kids of today. They want their superheroes and video games.
Mm-hmm.
They don't give a shit about Santa Claus. Santa Claus falls into a depression and gives up on Christmas, and then he's talked into becoming, are you ready? Super Santa. And then everything, of course, is ruined. And then little Emily sees what's going on, and she goes to rescue Santa and rediscover the spirit of Christmas. Well, all right.
I love it. That is so awesome. Why isn't that a movie?
Yes, it was the screenplay. It would have been great. And then when Red One came out, we were afraid that they had ripped our screenplay from 2009 because he had shared it with some of the folks who were like, involved in Red One. And sure enough, Red One's totally different. We think our story is much, much better. And then since our screenplay was just fallow, I said, this could make a great, not just a kid's book, let's do an adult book. Let's do a novel.
Yeah.
And then, so we entered this realm where, again, I get carried away. I like to type, and the story just exploded.
Mm-hmm.
And then we envisioned like this trilogy, and then I ended up writing 1,000 pages, of which pretty close to 500 made it into the first book. A gargantuan novel, illustrated novel. But selling it was so difficult because people didn't know what the hell we were talking about. Is this a kid's book? Why would an adult want to read about Santa Claus, right? And then it was a novel. There's the story of a interracial family and all this stuff going on. But what the hell does that have to do with the North Pole?
Yeah.
And my idea was to blend fantasy with reality and to keep them separate and then intertwine them. And, so I spent a lot of time working this out, and I think the output is pretty good. But to your exact point, where do you put it on the bookshelf? Is it in fantasy? Well, maybe. Is it in holiday books? Well, who wants to read a 500-page novel for Christmas?
Right.
And so it was like what I call over the head and between the legs, which is it was too sophisticated for an audience who would otherwise want to read about Santa Claus. And it was too rough around the edges and too whimsical for anyone who would take literature seriously. So no one knew what the hell Super Santa is. And also, it takes a while to break through. But my new one, though, is the pet project that I had. And there's no illustrations, and it's all me. And I went wild with a multiverse concept in a way where I blended the backdrop of the multiverse with very, very raw, very, very contemporary characters who embody all the shittiness that we're living through in 2025. Everything from the gender wars to the generational wars to business.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, we're in a big old mess right now. So I made it as visceral and real as I could with characters who embodied really the most awful aspects of our society, and then put that within the context of Max Tegmark's Level 4 multiverse. So, reality as we know it is nothing like reality as it actually is, and that there's a mathematical or some kind of logical foundation to reality itself. And in a sense, reality is an illusion, but it's also something that we can create, and we're finite and mortal beings, but we might be replicated an infinite number of times in an infinite number of ways in an infinite number of universes. So that kind of dichotomy between being alive here right now in this shitty society and endless possibility and expression both of ourselves and creatively created that kind of dynamism and backdrop. And it gelled for a while, and I spent about a year busting ass on this book, of which the last about 5, 6 weeks were insane. I was just like total immersion. And I think out popped something that exceeded even my own expectations. And it's the first book in a series, and I'm excited about it. I'm like, I think I cracked it. If nothing else, I've cracked my own code of writing
Excellent.
a book that I love it. This is the book I always wanted to read. So
Well, and
that's like,
that's where you need to start for sure.
yeah. So that's my enthusiasm. The next step, begs the question of getting it in front of people, how to do that. And all of that begs the question of exactly what you were just talking about and living through and writing through, which is, if the book is original, doesn't matter how much you love your own shit.
Yeah.
People need to A, see it, and then B, kind of understand what the hell you're trying to get at.
Yeah.
And that's challenging.
Yeah. Talk about your narrative style, your 3-line. Talk about that, because that's what's
Yeah.
one of the things that's really unique about your book. Besides the story stuff, I think that's really fascinating. Like that, to me, I would die having to write like that.
Oh yeah, it's an interesting trajectory. So one of the things I've been grappling with as a writer since I've been writing is where do you set boundaries for yourself? All right. So you're a writer. You spend days and weeks and months. You're sitting there writing, right? So how do you know when to start and stop a paragraph, let alone a section or even a story? When a painter paints a picture, they've got a canvas, and that's it, right? You can't throw paint against the wall, although that became the vogue in postmodern stuff, right? So you got a canvas, and you gotta capture the essence of the thought or the image or the feeling on a 3x4 canvas. But as a writer, we're linear. So we just write, and then it wraps, and it goes page after page. And now we're in the digital world where text just kind of floats in the ether, right? When you're on Kindle, unless you've got the page count at the bottom, you don't even know where the hell you are and when a section is going to begin or end. If you're holding a physical book, then you're more like, I'm about halfway through, right? I'm
Right.
3/4 of the way through.
Flip to when the next chapter starts.
Yeah. You flip through and then you dog ear it and then you go back. It's like media used to be, like vinyl records. The content was of physical objects, and books used to be exclusively physical objects. So it was the thing. And in that sense, it had a boundary too. Now we're in digital. So who knows where things start and stop, right? That's one pressure point. The other pressure point, also in digital, is people are reading short little nuggets of content. You go to Axios.com, you look at most articles online. At the top of the article, they'll say 3-minute read, 5-minute read. Then when you start reading, they'll have a bulleted summary of the shit that's coming, or a summary at the end with links and all that. And we're on our phones, and we're running from the toilet to the kitchen to the car to our job. And we're experiencing these little blasts of content. We're experiencing tweets of content. Whether we know it or not, whether we're conscious or unconscious about it, we are consuming content in tweets. And I got to thinking about this, and I'm like, the usual consumption of content as a tweet is anywhere from like 25 to 35 words in a blast. And then I thought, what if an entire novel were religiously written in blasts of 25 to 35 words, right? And then what if I obsessively made them like lyric poetry on the page, and format it in the print in the print book, so that they're aligned with each other.
Yeah.
So whenever you're reading the prose, it's like these lyric, poetic blocks of text, and then when there's dialogue, of course you're going to break up that rhythm. But I didn't ever allow myself to go past that 3 lines. It could be 1 or 2 lines, maybe 3, but never 4. And then how would that impact my writing, and how would that impact the reading? And I went for it. And a lot of this evolved also from writing hundreds of blogs on Medium, where I got kind of weird and OCD, where I was writing in block paragraphs even back to 2018. I did a great novella on Medium. I wrote it in Medium, and it's it's like an hour and a half read. Greg's Gift, which is a Romana Clay style autobiography from the 90s, my raucous 90 years. And it's written in block paragraphs too, obsessively so. And it's got like 12 sections, of which each section has 10 paragraphs, and each paragraph has 5 lines.
Mookie.
So I've been doing this crazy bullshit for years, and I loved it. And here's the thing: as a writer, you might appreciate it, or at the same time have a heart attack. This might even create anxiety just hearing me say this shit. It gamified my writing. So when I was writing the Johnny Fazzulli book, I had to write and rewrite paragraphs 5, 6, 7, 10 times to make it fit. And what that did was forced me to be even more succinct than I usually am, where it's my tendency to just keep describing stuff, drilling down into ideas. So I had max 30, anywhere from 32 to max 34, 35 words, about 190 characters in each paragraph. And if I went over that, then I either had to rewrite the paragraph or commit to another 3-line paragraph. So it gamified my writing process. And it was fun. I'm like, I'm going to make this work. And from an editorial point of view, it was an absolute blast, because if you're writing in random ad hoc paragraphs of uneven length, then let's say you want to make a change to a character, to a scene. It's really hard because you got to dive into your paragraphs, and you might have to rip them apart and reassemble them, and the continuity's lost, and you really have to rewrite everything you've written to make any kind of reorganizational or editorial change on a macro level. Well, guess what? In Johnny Fazzulli and the Transfinite Reality Engine, you've got these obsessive 3-line paragraphs, and they're like Lego pieces. So if I wanted to add another thought to a section and elaborate on an idea, I just tucked in new Lego pieces. And then if a part of a scene didn't quite hit it dramatically, and I felt that it would be more impactful earlier or later on, I just cut those Lego pieces and I put them later or earlier. Isn't that kind of cool?
Yeah, that's totally rad.
This is like totally wild, and I got obsessed with this shit. And it was so fun to write. And here's the last part of my my rant here about 3-line paragraphs. It's completely ad hoc and kind of ridiculous, but super fun to read, because it's kind of like you're getting punched in the face, left, right, and the ideas flow, they pop. I made a rule: every single 3-line paragraph has to make sense, be clear, and explode in your brain. It has to share an idea, move the story along. It's got to be there for a reason. And now I'm tweeting the whole novel. I had some glitches. I got, spam botted, and then some friends liked a few posts, and I got a little less aggressive in the frequency of the tweets. But I am tweeting the entire novel in reverse on the @JohnnyFazzulli profile of X. And so far, it's back to normal. It's cranking them out again. I'm like, it's actually going to work. And what's awesome is each paragraph is a tweet. And I'm getting it out in the whole book, and it kind of flows. It's like if you go to the top and read down, it's like there's the novel coming to life in reverse, just because it's, first in, first in, last out for Twitter, right? Because you can't reverse the order. And this is, I think, how people like to read. It forced me to be succinct and impactful and actionable, and it was super fun to write, and I'm hoping it's super fun to read.
Well, I can't wait to get into it. seeing as
Well,
how I've only heard
I'm
about it in the
sure.
last few days.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think, and I'm gonna write the whole damn series in this style. So
Uh,
Johnny is
you have to.
415 pages, and
Oh.
I got it's on in a 6x9 paperback format. Obviously, I did Kindle where you lose this, but it's still kind
Uh-huh.
of cool in Kindle because it's still chunky like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll just keep cranking. And my last point my last point is it actually fits the mood and style of the narrative because remember I'm talking about the shittiness of 2025,
Mm-hmm.
of which some of it has some benefit, which is we're all ADHD, we're all going nuts with all of this information, and it captures that immediacy, frenetic pace, and it does so in these little tweet blasts that convey the story and at the same time keep it kind of moving and exciting. I hope. So that's the idea.
I think you're the Shakespeare of 2025.
Well, we'll see. Thank you. If you could, I'll quote you on the on the second
Yeah.
edition for that, and let's see what happens. I mean, I
Yeah.
loved writing it this way, and it was fun, and the other aspect I think which is different, and remember we were talking about how the stakes are kind of arbitrary. You've got the alien invasion trope, and then you've got the terraforming Mars trope. You also have the multiverse trope, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is
Yeah.
ubiquitous now. And I've been grappling with the multiverse idea for decades, and I had a hard time kind of translating it into the backdrop for a story like this. And what hit me was I needed a bad guy. I needed a bad guy, and I needed the stakes to not be a planet or a galaxy or even a universe. I needed the stakes to be reality itself, which is bold.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
and it smacks a little bit of the Avengers, right? Like the reality stones, or what do they call those?
I don't remember.
The something stones, right? And then you've got all these movies and books that play with this idea of infinite universes and variation. The Deadpool movie with Wolverine, right, dived into
Right.
that. But
Loki, the TV show.
right, Loki, the TV show, with the agency that kind of manages it and all that.
The
So
TVA.
right, so I riff on that. That's my trope. But I'm a science geek like you. And I go, I'm gonna go hard sci-fi on this. So spoiler alert, I created a bad guy who is a Boltzmann brain. Are you familiar with that concept in cosmology? Did it make it into your Astro book?
It didn't make it into the book.
Yeah. So basically, the idea is that if you have enough time and space, for example, a dying universe, like our universe is apparently accelerating in its expansion, then if it continues to accelerate and expand, you're going to have all the stars burning out and the black holes evaporating, and you're just going to have naked space for endless eons that are accelerating into nowhere.
It's called entropy.
Yes. Well, one of the aspects of entropy is theorized by a guy by the name of Ludwig Boltzmann, which is where Boltzmann brain comes from, is that you could have a state of thermal equilibrium, and we're talking about something ridiculous like 10 to the minus 30 Kelvin, right, for the backdrop of this dead universe. It still has thermal energy, and it still has quantum fluctuations in the space-time. So there's a theory which is really exciting that the probability of something being created from nothing, and in this case the something is a fully formed conscious brain, is actually higher than if a conscious brain would evolve in an earlier version of the universe, because when you're looking at infinite time and space, that's so much bigger than the small little sliver of 13.8 billion years that we're in.
Right.
So there's this paradox of the Boltzmann brain that a dying universe would have a higher probability of creating sentient being than it evolving naturally. And there's all sorts of discussion around why that is or isn't the case. So my bad guy is a Boltzmann brain who gains the keys to the kingdom of reality. Why? Because she's floating out there for endless eons. And if mathematics and logic are the foundation of reality, well, she figures that shit out too, because she's got a lot of time on her hands.
Yeah.
So I have the ultimate bad guy. She evolved from nothing. She's omnipotent and omnipresent, and she falls in love with reality's biggest loser. So she's obsessed by the one person who doesn't give a shit about her, as lovers often do.
Uh-huh.
And the driving force of my narrative is this transcendent being who's gained what I call access to the emergence equations for controlling and manipulating reality, is obsessed by a moron. And that's the dynamic tension in the book, at least as its background. And I riff on that, and it's super fun because I'm giving the reader hints along the way, like, who the hell is she? Why am I writing about this maniac? and how do their worlds come together and to what end?
Right.
So
it sounds like there's a lot of potential for humor there too.
Oh my, yeah, tons. So it's satirical. It's, if you're familiar with Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, that's an inspiration. Douglas Adams, of course, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, and William Gibson with his fantastic, poetic writing about the futuristic stuff. So I have elements of these guys together. But I think I carved my own style, and I'm excited about it. And I think, like I said before, that I exceeded my own expectations. The challenge, though, is getting other folks to be interested, right?
Exactly. Actually, that's funny because I wrote down, get back to best practices, and then I forgot what I wanted to get back to. So I'm just sitting here trying to remember.
Well, it's easy, right? So, you've been at it for years, and one best practice that you mentioned is joining a group of like-minded souls on the similar adventure as you, and then sharing what works and what doesn't. So that in and of itself is kind of a self-referential best practice, right?
Absolutely. And keeping each other motivated also helps, because the second thing I want to say is you have to finish a book. Like, none of the marketing or any of that stuff matters until you finish a book. So, and by finish, I mean a first draft. It doesn't have to be publishable at that moment. Editing is an incredibly important part of the process. And since I do, that's what I was when you get to editing, so I do line editing. I do copy editing too. That's when your book is pretty much done, and just before proofreading. Trust me, that like so many processes here. But I do line editing now. I got certified by the Editorial Freelancers Association, and what that means is that you're taking the language and you're enhancing it to sound better, to work better, to add drama to the moment. Not developmental editing, which is like looking at the whole story as a big picture and figuring that stuff out. I use beta readers for that. But this is like line by line, like, how do we make this pop more? And so I'm thinking about this as you're describing your, 3 lines, your, tweet-sized paragraphs or whatever. And the difference in when you're doing good drama in regular prose, it's not that paragraphs like end randomly or whatever. There's a very specific kind of literary structure to how a paragraph should be formed and shaped. And also how you use the spaces and the gaps and the punctuation to create pauses within the writing itself. So there's a whole set of, like, it's not rules, but guideline. I don't know. There's just a way to do it that can really enhance the readability of a book and add to the drama in the story by the way you shape your paragraphs. So it's a fascinating It was a fascinating thing to learn.
I'm with you 100%. When I did Super Santa, I went rogue, and by rogue I mean I did not follow this convention at all. I had a
Mhm.
collaborator. He was video conferencing in. There was really no way that I could own it in that sense of just kind of, domesticating the prose into these crazy three lines. And I was kind of saving it for Johnny. And what you're saying is fascinating because, and I'd be very, very curious for your feedback on whether I pulled this off or not. You would think that I destroyed all convention by forcing prose into these fairly symmetrical three-line paragraphs because you no longer have that and you have much less room for it to breathe, right?
Uh-huh.
Which is, da 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 da. And then to your point, it's the pauses that are very significant. It's the shifts in mood and tone, and then the return, and it's the building and release of tension. And if you're
Mhm.
writing in ad hoc, and not ad hoc, but you're writing in what I would call
Regular
these
prose?
just regular prose. I've forgotten what that's like. Then you got more room for this. You have
Right.
endless room for this, and it's not random because you're following the tenets that you just described.
Mhm.
Now, I also follow them, and I think I'm following them equally religiously, but there's a breakdown here between syntax and semantics. And I
Mhm.
think that's what you're getting at, which is, syntax is tied to semantics, but semantics rules, right? The syntax is just the tool of semantics. It's about the meaning, it's about the underlying dramatic tension and descriptions and everything you're doing, right?
Yeah.
So I blend syntax and semantic in this OCD insane kind of way, very unconventional. But I think it works because I'm on the pulse of everything that you describe, only I'm forcing it into this poetic kind of style. So
Yeah.
you'll have all that tension. You'll have build up and release. You have pauses. I found myself using a lot of M dashes
Yeah, I love M
because
dashes.
I love M dashes, and it became paramount for me because I got to cut to it fast. I'm at line 2.5 on this paragraph. The clock is ticking.
Mhm.
I've only got like 10 words left. I got to wrap it. And
Yep.
an M dash is great because it cuts right to it without having to worry about grammar and without leaving it as a dangling kind of modifying phrase.
Right.
It organically fits back into the continuity of the flow.
Right.
So that's
Interesting.
tricky.
So
Yeah, but
here's what we're gonna do. When I finish reading your book, we're gonna talk about this. We're gonna have a whole
okay.
podcast just for that. All right?
I would love that. And to me, I cherish this opportunity for someone, especially you, where you're trained in editing, you're a professional editor, and I had no editor. It's just me in my bedroom sweating balls. And I would love for your complete and unabashed feedback about all aspects of it, and especially this three-line obsession, which I've found just to be so much fun. I love it. It took me a long time to learn how to do it. It's like learning how to write all over again,
Yeah.
and
It's
and
eh,
it's such a trip.
I'm excited to read it. I am
Yeah,
because yeah, especially from that point of view, not even just the story, right? Which is
yeah,
why I brought it up.
well, thank you. And again, I look forward to how clear it is for you, and it's the kind of book too that you might not know exactly what the hell's going on at any moment, especially when I add some poetic features and there's some premonitions, there's dreams, there's all this stuff. But I made it absolutely a prerequisite that each three-line paragraph in and of itself totally makes sense and you know exactly what's going on. And building it up from the ground up, so to speak, is kind of like building a house with solid materials.
Hmm.
It's like I felt that the overall structure would hold if on this microscopic syntactic scale it was equally on firm footing. Does that kind of make sense?
Uh huh.
Where I was writing and rewriting, that's not clear. and it forced me to be more succinct and
Yeah.
actionable.
Yeah. No, I think, and it's a great writing exercise. Like if I were teaching a writing class, like I would say, okay, we're going to do it like this. And that would be a great way to sort of force people to rethink how they use language, rethink how they're going to not say too much. It's very common for, you see this a lot in line editing where people say too much. And there's always the adage like, why use like 10 words when one word will do?
Right.
Honestly, like it happens
Right.
a lot. And even in my own writing, I worry sometimes. I'm like, okay, I definitely need someone to edit this for me because I can't see it in myself anymore. So,
Yeah, and even writers like J.K. Rowling, right? I call her the adverb queen,
yeah.
right? Like Harry Potter, wildly and enthusiastically, ran to his zealous, I mean, she just piles on. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's just a little much. We get it. Harry's excited.
Right. And yeah, adverbs are okay sometimes, right? Sometimes an adverb actually can help with the rhythm and flow of the
Right.
reading of a story or whatever.
Right.
But I'm always an advocate of choosing a verb or a, whatever to make it to describe that without the adverb. And it's not that adverbs are evil. It's just that sometimes they're just not necessary. So too much of them, and that can actually destroy the flow and structure of your story. So yeah, I think in that case, J.K. Rowling's a good example.
Yeah. I'm not mean to pick on her, but
You
she
can pick
is,
on her.
and I mean, I like her a lot. I think Goblet of Fire is like a masterpiece. I think that's when her vision really came together, and it's a world. It's when the Harry Potter world builds itself, and I thought the story was fun, and the dragons and the game they played was terrific. That's
Yeah.
like my favorite in the series. I bought the series for my kids. They of course didn't read it, so I'm like, oh, I'm gonna read it. And it was a revolution in that kind of genre, and it was a hybridization of a few things in a way that really worked, and it was character driven. So again, it's like I could bash JK for a number of reasons, but she did it, and it's awesome. But at the same time, her prose does suffer, if you will, from some of the indulgences that we're describing. And my 3-line obsession was my way of not specifically addressing JK's challenges, but just the challenges of really the genre itself, which is, why does this paragraph even exist?
Exactly. Or the sentence or these words. Yeah.
Yes. And forcing myself really in this excruciating knot. And it became kind of like coding. Back in the day, I had an Apple IIe computer, and I used to love interactive fiction.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you've ever heard of that. The Zork.
Yeah, I used to write it.
Oh, awesome!
Even as a teenager,
awesome.
yeah. Even in middle
Oh my
school, we
God,
were writing interactive fiction.
You are a kindred soul, and
Yeah.
I used to program some of that stuff in Pascal, one of the early languages, and I used to be fascinated how the routines and subroutines and the nested paragraphs all looked.
I used to
on the screen.
On the screen, yeah. I loved the aspect of branching stories. I loved like choose your own adventure books. So
yeah, totally.
creating a lot of that stuff was just so much fun, and we did it in BASIC when I was in middle school anyway. But we had no real way to store it. We had tape recorders, like the kind that you push the 4 buttons in the like the tape recorder would, but it would take like a whole day to record your program, and sometimes like that stuff would get deleted because like the teacher would turn the computer off or somebody didn't know what they were doing, and it was so frustrating. But yeah, we loved writing those things, and I loved making the branching structures. And then I feel like writing's a lot of that today. I think that might even be fun to write as like lit RPG or something that
Yeah, I love that too, and I do hints of it in this novel. So there's a branching segment there's a cycling little vignette with one of the main characters, Penny. Penny is cock blocked in a sense by the Boltzmann brain at one point, and then she regains consciousness, and it's a cycling vignette where it's like that branching story. It repeats over and over again. And then I have some self-referential stuff, but later in the series I'm going to play with that more. And I thought that the future of fiction would be more interactive, and it just hasn't really played out that way. People don't want to work when they read. Enough effort goes into reading.
Yeah.
So
Or
this
people
idea
just
of
want a whole story.
they want a whole story. And I know that Steven Spielberg was even playing with the idea that the audience could vote for an ending.
Uh-huh.
He seriously thought about that for a while, and people just want to sit back and absorb. You're on your couch watching Netflix, and you don't want to turn it into a mental exercise.
Right.
But there are people like us where it'd be like, wow, that would be
Uh-huh.
cool to see it. And it's really at the heart of the multiverse concept too, which is the idea that there are an infinite number of universes, and every possibility plays itself out, and we're just on one world line. Well, that obviously lends itself inherently, thematically, to this idea of interactive fiction. It's like
Yeah.
choose your own adventure. The Bandersnatch episode in Black Mirror,
Uh-huh.
if you saw that was the last example in multimedia where they actually integrated the idea of the branching story.
Right.
You tap your iPad, you want the character to jump out the window or exit
Right.
the door, and then the story would change. So, but
And I think that's brilliant, but I think Netflix has taken that down.
Oh, really? Why?
Whoever hosted it. Yeah, I don't know. I remember reading somewhere they're like, oh, they're going to be taking that down. So if you haven't watched all the different versions, you should probably
Really?
do that.
Oh,
but...
maybe it was too data intensive because there's literally like trillions of versions.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Right?
I didn't know.
Yeah.
Well, it's a finite thing because when you're filmmaking, you're only going to make some. It's kind of, remember the movie Clue?
Yeah.
With Tim Curry?
Yeah.
And it had the 3 different endings, and they wanted you to, go to the theater 3 different times, right?
3 times, yeah.
So you want to see all the different endings, but you didn't know you might see the same ending twice, and then you had to go again.
Yeah. But
So-
I think Bandersnatch, if I remember, had 19 different
19, wow.
branching points, and that's exponential. So
That's
that's
a lot.
why it's that's how you get like a trillion different versions. And the Brian Eno movie that was there, the Brian Eno documentary, I forgot even what it's called, but that literally had like 40 quadrillion different versions. So every time you went to the theater, they would randomize it. So this idea of branching networks and all that, it's exponential in terms of the combination. So they could get a little wacky. But the Brian Eno documentary was the last kind of playful expression of this, which is kind of
now
cool.
I'm feeling like I need to write one of those, but I have too many books in the queue right now, and I will just set that aside until I get through these. Writing this fantasy, which I could turn into that. It would actually kind of work, but I'm just going to stick with what I got so far. I have to finish by the end of July, so.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing, right? We need these bite-sized chunks of getting stuff done. I've already got my novel, actually, this Johnny business, is actually half of the story. So the original version had Johnny getting the idea for the transfinite reality engine, branding it, then getting it designed and built, and then spoiler alert, it actually works. So the end of the story is him getting blasted into another universe, lead into book 2. But once I started writing and adding, it kept mushrooming and growing. So this book is now 2 books. So, there are 2 books before Johnny even gets the damn thing to work.
You sound like George Lucas. Now you've got your whole 9-episode storyline. You just have to make it all happen.
Hopefully it's better, though.
For the Handler's Gambit, you'd hope. For the Handler's Gambit, I have the origin story of the strategist. I have an origin story of the assassin, but hers is a little more dark. They're both dark, but hers is terribly dark, so I don't know if I'd ever write a book about that. But his is fun. And if you like Ender's Game, his will be more like that, except with more drama.
Cool. More character.
Yeah.
It's like more cowbell, more character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and then, there's plenty of what could these 2 do later? So,
yeah, that's terrific.
A lot of expansion opportunities.
I look forward to reading yours too. And we do the book swap, exercise. And we'll put for listeners, we'll put links to all this stuff in the description and track forward. So we have a goal now. You'll check You show me yours, I show you mine, and then we could have our follow-up podcast. We could chit
Yeah.
chat.
Yeah, there you go.
Right?
That'd be fun.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for making time, Ingrid. I appreciate it.
Always.
It was a lively conversation, and in our next chat too, we can go into even more details on best practices for trying to get out there. Right?
Yeah, since we only got what, 2 this time.
That's right. Well, we can collect them. It'll make it worth our while and hopefully everyone else's. So thanks so much for coming on board. Thanks for listening to the Bald Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Mookie Spitz, and author. And we've been talking to Ingrid Moon about publishing and marketing and some of the pitfalls to avoid when trying to write a good story that isn't just about things, but is about people doing stuff, just like we're people doing stuff, and that's the heart of drama. So thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.